Hey folks, welcome back. In this video, we are going to continue looking at repetition. So this is going to be the second video in a series of repetition videos. So we're going to start off and we're going to trace a new program here. So little program, class main, public static void main, and then we have a integer x, which is set to 11, and we have a loop, which seems to say while x is greater than 10. All right, so we're going to step through this one by one, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before, where we have our output window and we have our variable area so that we can see what's going on with all of this. All right, so without further ado, we're going to hit next. So we're going to start the main method. We always start at the beginning. This creates a variable for me. This is my x, and it is currently equal to 11. Moving on to the next thing, we check if while x is greater than 10, so while 11 is greater than 10, which that's true, 11 is greater than 10, so life is good, so we're going to proceed into the loop. All right, so that's going to print out hello, and we see our output has a hello in it. X++, okay, so x is now equal to 12. We hit the end of the loop, and we're going to go back up to the top of the while loop, and we're going to check the while condition again. So this time it's 12 greater than 10, which is true. So we continue, we print the hello, and we increment x to 13, we get to the bottom of the loop, and we go back up to the top. Now, we should probably be having a thought in the back of our mind. This seems like it's going weird. So we started off with x equal to 11, and we're checking if x is greater than 10. Well, 11 is greater than 10, and so is 12, and so is 13, and so is 14, and 15, and 16, and 100, and 900, and 1,000, and 2,000, and 50,000. As a matter of fact, when will this loop end? And the answer is, it's not going to end. This loop is just going to keep going and going and going forever because it will always be able to add 1 to the x, which will be 13, then 14, then 15, then 16, and all of those numbers are greater than 10. The way that we wrote this is not syntactically wrong. This is valid code. You can type this into a machine and it will run, but it's doing something that you probably don't mean for it to do. All right, so I'm just going to come over here to a replit window, and I'm just going to basically paste this code in. So we have an int x equals 11, and then we have a while x is greater than 10, and then we had a print statement, and it said hello, and then we had x++, and then we didn't have this hello world down at the bottom. Okay, so that's my code. I'm going to hit run and watch the output window over here on the right. Hello, 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 hello. And it looks like it has stopped, but it actually hasn't. If I can hit enter a couple of times, you can see down at the bottom next to my little my video window here, wherever that is, over there. Yeah, there. You can see that what's happening there is that it's actually still doing it. Even if I type on the keyboard and try to interrupt it, you can see the hello is just coming back over and over again. And this will run pretty much forever. As a matter of fact, it'll run until you turn off the computer or you hit stop, because this is what's called an infinite loop. An infinite loop runs forever, infinitely, as it turns out. And it's not a syntax error to write an infinite loop. It's usually a logical error. And the flaw here was that x started off as 11, and I'm checking that it's greater than 10, and that doesn't really make any sense. Because I'm adding 1 to the x each time, it will always be greater than 10. So you're going to want to always find a condition that you will eventually meet by doing something with the variable inside. In this case, x was 11, and we're adding 1 to it, which will make it 12, and 13, and 14. That's never going to get you closer to x greater than 10. So just be careful of that when you're writing code, that you're conscious of the fact that you have to be careful that you don't accidentally make a loop that's going to keep going forever and ever. And that's really all this slide is saying here. So infinite loops are usually an error. And I say usually because there's occasionally times when you want something to go forever, but that's pretty unusual. Most of the time, an infinite loop is an error. So you should always be trying to avoid this. Usually, it's caused by one of two things. Either it is because your while condition will never be false, or inside the loop, nothing is changing it so that your while condition will eventually be false. And those two are related. In this case, it was the second one that was causing the problem, not the first one, because it is the case that I have a correct, or I have a valid while condition. It's just that I'm never going to reach that while condition. Okay, so let's take a look at another loop and let's trace this one. And this one's going to do something different. This is not another infinite loop. So we're going to take this and we're going to take a look at it and we're going to say, all right, x in this case is going to start off as 10. So I'm just going to move this over to the Java window. So x is 10, and then the condition is x greater than 0. And then in here, we do x minus minus. Okay, so that's what's on the slide. And if I run this, you'll see that it's going to run 10 times. Now, what I want to point out in this example is it isn't always the case that you're going to do x plus plus inside the loop. In the last 3 examples or 4 examples we've looked at between this video and the previous one, I've always done a plus plus. But sometimes it makes sense to start at x equal to 10, and in this case, it's going to work its way down to 9876. And as a matter of fact, if I just change this from printing hello to printing the x, what you're going to see is it's going to print 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, well, why didn't it print 0? Well, because I'm checking that x is greater than 0, so 1 works, but 0 does not work, so it will never actually run the loop when it gets to 0. All right, so again, you'll always have some kind of initialization, something that you're setting up in the beginning, and you'll almost always have a while loop that has a condition there that is checking if something is greater than some number or less than some number, or greater than a character and less than a character, or it could just be a Boolean expression and could even be a complex Boolean expression like we had seen in some of the earlier sections. There could be more than one thing that you would want to check in that. This could have an and or an or anything else in there. And then you're going to have some variable down here that is changing as you go through the loop in order for you to get closer to that terminating condition. All right, so that brings us on to our next example. As long as the loop is moving towards the Boolean condition, the loop will end. In this case, the x started at 10. Each time through the loop, it got a little bit smaller. Eventually, it reached 1. And then when it got to 0, 0 was not greater than the 0, so therefore the loop stopped. And so it's important to recognize you can go forwards or you can go backwards with the numbering. It doesn't matter as long as you eventually reach the terminating condition. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at a very basic calculator here. And so this is something that we've done a bunch of times before. And so what I'm going to do is up at the top, I'm going to include scanner, Java util scanner. And I'm going to make a scanner object like we've done a million times as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to prompt the user system.out.println, enter a number, and I'm going to read in a number into num1 myscan.nextInt, and then I'm going to ask the user for a second number, and then I'm going to read in another int, which I'm going to store in num2. All right, and then I'm going to add those two numbers together, and I'm going to store that in an answer. And then I'm going to print out that answer. And I'm going to put in a semicolon there like I'm supposed to, and then I'm going to delete everything that's down below it. Okay, so what I've done here, there's no loop in this. I'm just prompting the user to enter in a number. I'm going to allow the user to enter in one number. I'm then going to ask the user for another number. So 10 and 20, and it says the answer is 30. And of course, if I run it again, I can get 50 and 7, and the answer would be 57. All right, so this works, but it has a limitation, which is it's only going to ask you for 2 numbers. And what happens if I want to add 3 numbers or 4 numbers or 5 numbers? Well, up until now, really the only thing you could do is copy these 2 lines and paste them again and paste them again and paste them again. But that's really inefficient. It's a whole bunch of code. And no matter how many times you do it, what happens if I need more? So like, for example, you could do it 2 times or you could do it 5 times. But what happens if I need 10 numbers or I need 100 numbers or I need 1,000 numbers? Wouldn't it be great if there was a way that we could make this a little bit better? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the prompt for the second. Actually, that's not true. I'm not going to get rid of that at all. I'm going to put a loop around this second number. So what I'm going to say is while continue I'll call it keep going. While keep going is true, then we're going to keep asking them for numbers. All right, I'm going to move that over just so that it's clear that it's inside the while loop. Just like if statements, you should always be indenting when you're putting stuff inside of while loops. Now, you might say, well, what is this keep going? I'm going to set a Boolean. Keep going is equal to true. All right, so while keep going is equal to true, we're going to ask them for a number. We're going to read in the number, and I'm going to just keep track of a sum. So I'm going to say int sum equals 0. And then each time in the loop, I'm going to say sum plus equals, in this case, num2. I'm just going to change that to number 1 because, well, there's no num2 anymore. All right, that's a bit more reasonable. Okay, so take whatever they gave me and add that to the sum variable. All right, so now if I get rid of what's down below here, other than the print statement that prints out the final answer, you can see this loop, I guess it was sum is what I called it. This loop will keep going forever and ever and ever. So that's not really what I want, but I'm just going to prove that that's going to happen. So it asks me for a number, 17, and then another number, 22, and another number, 95, and another number, 100. Okay, and this will just keep going. It'll forever and ever and ever and ever and ever keep asking me questions, which isn't exactly what I wanted. What I wanted was every now and again, it would just prompt me and ask, do you want to do more? So we're going to add another print statement in here. So system.out.println, keep going. And we expect them to give me a yes or no. Oof. Okay, and now I got to read that in. So I'm going to do answer, should I keep going equals myscan.next line. And then if should I keep going is not equal to yes, then I'm going to set that Boolean, keep going, to false. Okay, so the Boolean that's controlling the loop is called keep going. And basically what I'm doing down here is I'm asking them, do they want to keep going? And if they say yes, then I'm not going to do anything. But if they say no, then I'm going to change keep going to false, which will end the loop. Now, this would all work except for one weirdness of Java. If you have a scanner next int, and then you have a scanner next line, it's going to cause a weird bug. And I'm not going to go into the details of that because I think I've covered it in class, but suffice it to say, anytime that you have a next int and a next line after it, you're always going to want to do an extra next line right after the next int. So right after you do a next int, you're just going to do a next line, and now it'll work correctly as it should. All right, so I'm going to hit run on this, and let's see how this works. Looks like there's an error there somewhere. All right, incompatible type, string cannot be converted to int, and that is on line 16. Oh yeah, I stored that as an int. That should be a string. What was I thinking? I'm reading in a string. All right. And yeah, that's not how you compare strings. You do dot equals that. That's what I meant to do. All right, I'm just going to hit stop and run it again because that error probably wasn't fixed. Okay, so now it's going to ask me to enter in a number. And so I'm going to type in 50, and then it's going to ask me for another number. And I'm going to type in 20, and another number 30, and another number 40. And then, what am I doing? I'm not answering the question it's asking. Let's do that again. Sorry, let's run that example again. So it asks me for a number, and I type in 50. And then it says keep going, and I say yes. Oh, I did this backwards. I needed a not. If they did not answer yes, actually what I should have just done is if they answer no, not yes. Okay, let's try this a third time. All right, so to be clear, we have a while loop. It's going to print out, enter a number. Then it's going to read in a number. It's going to put that number into the sum variable so that it's adding on to the sum each time. Then it's going to ask me if I want to keep going. If I say yes, it's going to keep going. If I say no, it's going to set keep going equals false, which is going to stop the loop. So enter a number. We're going to do 40. And then it says keep going, and I say yes. It says, okay, enter another number, 50. Yes, I would like to keep going. 100. Yes, I would like to keep going. And 7. No, I would not like to keep going. It says your answer is 197. So what I've done is basically, as the loop is running, I'm not using the sum variable in the loop. I'm not using that to keep track of where I am in the loop. I'm not counting anything. I'm allowing the user to keep giving me numbers until they decide that they are done. And the way that they're deciding that they're done is they're answering this question. That gives me a string, which will be either y or n if they follow the instruction. And then I check to see if that string is n, and if it is, I set keep going equal to false. So this loop will continue running until this if statement happens. Once that if statement happens, the Boolean will be changed to false, and then the loop will stop happening, which is what happened when it asked me, do you want to keep going? And I said no. So this is a pretty reasonable way of doing this, where I have a loop that I want to keep going, but it is a little cumbersome because the user has to keep saying, yes, I want to go, yes, I want to go, yes, I want to go. So the question is there a way that we could optimize this? So over on the slides, just so that you are aware, that code that I just typed in here is going to be on the side. This is the first version of it where I just read in 10 numbers using a while loop. And then the next version of it is the one that I just did, where there's a keep going variable and it's checking that. All right, so two things I want to point out here that are different between this code and the code that I just typed. So on this code, I wrote while keep going. But on the code that I wrote over here, I said while keep going equals true. Those two things are actually equivalent because what's inside of here, this whole thing inside of these parentheses, has to evaluate as a Boolean. So it either has to be true or false. Well, keep going is already a Boolean. So you can just use it and you can say while keep going, and then as long as keep going is true, it will work. But this is a little more explicit. I'm being very clear about my intent. While keep going is true, then keep going through the loop. To be fair, this is unnecessary. The code would work the same either way, because again, keep going by itself is a Boolean. And just to prove that point, I'm going to run it again without the equal true. And there's 50, yes, 20, yes, and 10, no. And that still comes out to 80. So it doesn't matter whether you do the equal true. It's unnecessary code, but it sometimes makes sense in people's head to think of it when they're starting out. So it works either way. And as I said, this is weird that you have to do this down here. It only is necessary if you're doing a next int, and then somewhere else in your code you're doing a next line. Then in that case, you need to add in this weird extra next line. All right, and there's a video about that earlier if you want to go back and review that. Okay, so this works, as I say. It allows the user to type in numbers, and it keeps asking them if they want to keep going, but it's a little bit cumbersome. So how could we make this less cumbersome for the user? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say enter -1 to stop. All right, so I changed the prompt for the user. When I'm asking them for a number, I'm now telling them that they just want to stop, enter in -1. I'm going to read in their next int, and I'm then going to check and see, did they give me -1? If my num1 is equal to -1, then I'm going to set the Boolean keep going equal to false, because that means that they're done. In all other circumstances, I'm going to add whatever they gave me to the sum. So I'm just going to move that up into the else statement. All right, and now I'm going to get rid of everything that's down below, this extra question where I'm asking them, do they want to keep going or not? All right, I seem to have inherited an extra curly brace, which happens sometimes. That looks reasonable. Okay, so now I'm going to run it. And the way that this works is instead of asking a separate question, do you want to continue, I just kind of built it into the original question. So give me a number, and I'm going to say 50, 20, 30, and then I'm going to type -1. And it says, okay, your answer is 100. So this cuts out the extra thing of the user having to type in numbers. But it does have one minor problem. What happens if the user actually wants to add -3, -2, and -1? Well, they're not going to get the right answer, because -3, -2, -1, it says the answer is -5, but actually if you add those three together, it should be -6. It's because the -1 isn't counting as part of the number. And it just depends. It just depends on what it is that you want the user to be able to do. So I randomly picked -1 as the thing that's going to make it end. I could have picked some other number. So I could have said, 9999, and then that becomes the magic number. So now I'm going to change the program and make it so that it asks them the same exact thing, except it says type 9999 to quit. And so here we have, 100 and 20 and 200 and 9999, and it tells me the answer is 200 or 320. So that works, but this is kind of what's called a magic number. 9999 is magic now to my program. You can type any number you want in except for 9999. And magic numbers are very common. You'll see this often where it tells you type in some number and type something else if you want to quit, because it doesn't have the overhead of having to re-ask the question over and over. Do you want to keep going? Do you want to keep going? But it still allows the user to enter in numbers and eventually quit. And there's a technical term for this. These special numbers are called Sentinel values. And so a Sentinel value is a special value that you're using to make the loop stop. It was -1 when I did it first time. It's currently 99.99. This is the code that I just did. And there's an example run over to the side where it tells you the sum is 60. So effectively what's going on here is I've kind of combined two things together. The prompt is asking the user to give me the next number, and it's also giving the user a way to stop when they're ready to stop. And you could theoretically do this with letters as well, where they type in the word stop instead of typing in a random number. But the problem with that is if you do that, then everything you read in has to be a string, and you're going to have to convert all of those strings into numbers to do the math. So a little bit of overhead. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I did in here. So this is just the print statement, and this is the reading in the number and storing it in num1, and hopefully that makes sense by now. In my if statement, I check to see if that number is equal to 9999. And remember, when I'm checking two things being equal, I have to use a double equal. If they are equal to the Sentinel value, then what I'm doing is I'm setting the Boolean to false. And again, this while loop will keep going as long as that value is true. Now, you might wonder about this else part. Why did I do the sum in the else? Why wouldn't I do it up here? Well, the if statement is checking that they gave me 9999. And in that circumstance, I don't want to actually add 9999 to the sum. So I want to be careful that when this if statement fires, the part that's highlighted in blue there, I don't actually add 9999. In every other circumstance, though, I do need to add whatever number they gave me, and that's why that ends up in an else. So if they give me 9999, I'm changing the Boolean, but if they give me any other number, I'm adding that onto the sum, and that's the use of an if and an else here, because I'm doing two different things based on what they gave me. Either they gave me a real number, in which case I'm adding it to the sum, or they gave me the Sentinel value, in which case I'm making the loop stop by setting keep going equals false. I'm just going to do one other thing here as an example as well. If I put an extra line here, this is line 18 apparently. If I put an extra line down here and run the program, I just want to show you how that actually works. So it's going to ask me for a number, and I'm going to type in 50, and then it's going to ask me for a number, and I'm going to type in 20. And notice as I'm doing this, each time line 18 is happening because I can see it right there in the output. So what I'm saying is the while loop is all of these statements. It's not just the part that reads in the number, it's not just the if statement, it's everything in between those curly braces. So each time through the loop, I'm going to do line 18. And as I keep entering in numbers, there's another 50 and there's another 20, we're going to see line 18 every time. Now I'm going to type in 9999. So let's be clear, currently it's executing this line of code. It's waiting for me to hit enter on that 9999. When I hit enter, it's going to compare num1 equal to 9999, which is going to be true, so it's going to set keep going equals to false. And then it's going to continue. It's not magically stopping the loop at that moment. It's still going to go through all the rest of the code. And the way an if statement works is if the Boolean is true, it's going to do all of the code that is inside the if statement. So if this is true, which it is in this case, it's going to do this, and then it's going to skip all the way down past the end of the if statement. If this was false, it would have done the part that's in the else and then skipped down to where the arrow is as well. So my point here is when I hit enter over here on this 9999, line 18 is still going to happen because it's going to do the comparison of the if statement, it's going to do this line, and then it's going to skip down past the end of the if and do that line, and then it's going to get to the end of the while loop, which is going to send it back up to the top of the while loop, and all of a sudden now this is false because it was set to false right here. That's when it's going to end. But the important part is you're going to see line 18 again when I hit enter. So hitting enter. Okay, I think I can hit enter. Let's see. There we go. So you see line 18 did happen, and then it moved on to line 20, which gave me the sum. So the order in which all of this happens is important. Just because the Boolean got changed here and the while loop is checking that Boolean, it doesn't actually check the Boolean until it gets back to line 9. And the way it gets back to line 9 is every time it hits line 19, in this case, which is the end of the while loop. So I want you to think about it this way. A while loop will go all the way through the code until it gets to the end of the while loop, and then it will come back up and reevaluate the condition at the top. And it'll do that all the time, over and over and over again, until that condition becomes false. Once it's false, the loop ends. And so we would have had an infinite loop here if it wasn't for the fact that something inside the loop can change that condition to false. Because it started off as true, and therefore the loop starts, and then unless something in here changes it, it will just keep going forever because it will always be true. But I avoided that by having this if statement that's checking for the Sentinel value and then setting the Boolean to false. So that's how these logic loops work. You're basically reading something in, and then in this case, adding it to a sum or changing the Boolean to false, and we're doing that over and over and over again. So this is actually a pretty useful little calculator at this point. We've built something which will allow you to type in an arbitrary set of numbers and get back an answer, which is pretty cool. And every time you run it, you can type in one number, you can type in 5 numbers, you can type in 10 numbers, 100 numbers, 1,000 numbers. There is no limit to what you can use this for. The only limit is you can't add 9999 as it's currently set. And that's why we use while loops. This loop is going to keep going until that's false. I don't know that it's going to ask me for 1 number or 5 numbers or 100 numbers. I have no idea how many numbers the user is going to type in. It could be any arbitrary set of numbers that they want to type in until they hit 9999. And then it just calculates the average, which apparently was 32,051 that time. So a while loop is very useful for doing something until something else is true. And often you just kind of manufacture that reason. The thing that's going to change in this case is the Boolean, and that Boolean is what's doing this magic. I also want to be clear that I called this keep going because that's kind of what we're making sure is happening, but the name of this Boolean is irrelevant. I could absolutely change this to x, x, and x, and all 3 of these would still continue working the same way. There's no difference here on what I have just done. So I don't want you to think in your head that keep going is some magical word, and as long as you use that, life is good, but that's not the case. It's working this way because of the logic of me checking that Boolean. The fact that it's called x now doesn't matter. It still worked exactly the same way. So just be careful of all of that. All right, so that's the idea of Sentinel values. They're a very common thing that you'll see used in loops, and so we just wanted to show you that as an example. All right, so the next example that we're going to look at is what's called a menu. And you see this a lot in programs where you might have a situation where the user is asked, would you like to do A, B, C, or D, or 1, 2, 3, or 4? And then the user chooses which one they want to do, and then the program proceeds asking more information about that. So we're going to start off with a very basic one here. So I'm going to start a new replet. And again, remember that you can always play with these replets. If you go to that URL up there, all of this replet can be yours, and you can play with it yourself by hitting the fork button. So to be clear, this is a new replet that I'm starting, which is where I'm going to do this menu example. If you type that URL in, you can just pause the video to get that URL, you will come to a page that will look very similar to this, and there'll be a button on there that's called fork. And if you hit the fork button, it will give you your own personal copy of this code, and you can make changes to it and run it yourself and see how it's working. To do things, to play around and practice. All right, so in this menu, what I'm supposed to do is I'm going to tell the user to pick from the following. And there are 3 choices that the user can choose from. So we have 1, say hello. We have 2, say goodbye. And we have 3, quit. Not quiz, quit. There we go. Okay, so we prompt the user with all of these things. If I run the program right now, it's just going to print the menu on the screen and the program's going to end because, well, I haven't told it to do anything else. So out on the screen, it's just going to say 1, say hello, 2, say goodbye, 3, quit, and it's going to wait. The program's going to end because we're doing nothing else. All right, so now I'm going to read in the user's input. So I need a scanner, import Java util scanner. And then I need to make a scanner object. So the same line that we've always typed, scanner, my scan equals new scanner, system.in. And then we are going to, down here, read in the user's choice. So int answer equals myscan.nextInt. Okay, so now it's going to actually wait for the user to type in a number. And now it seems like I would have a loop because I might allow them to do this over and over again. So they're going to get prompted with a menu, and if they say 1, they get told hello. If they say 2, they get told goodbye, and it'll keep going until they type in 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say while the answer is not equal to 3, we are going to keep going through the loop. If the answer is 1, we're going to print hello. Else if the answer is 2, then we're going to print goodbye. Cannot type today. And then the third choice is that they hit quit. Well, we don't really have to deal with that case because that's already dealt with in the while loop. All right, so if I run this program, it's not going to quite work the way that I want it to work yet, but let's see what happens. So the menu pops up on the screen, and it asks me, say hello, say goodbye, or say quit. So I'm going to hit 1 for say hello. And it just keeps saying hello, 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 hello. Why is that? Well, because I only ever read in the user's answer once. I'm going to hit stop to stop this. But I only read in the user's answer once, and that was outside the loop. So whatever number I typed in that first time, which was the number 1, that's what the loop is going to keep executing on. So answer is always equal to 1 in this case because that's what I typed. And so forevermore, it checks to see if 1 is equal to 1. It is. It prints hello. We go back to the top of the loop. And again, it says 1 is not equal to 3, and it checks is 1 equal to 1. So the problem that I have created here is another infinite loop. And the reason is because this is valid. This is what I want to happen. But I need to check and make sure that what they actually gave me is changing. I need to read back in another choice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the whole menu and the part where I read in their information, and I'm going to put it again inside the loop. All right, and so I'm just going to format that real quickly so it's nice and clean and easy to read. And I can't declare answer twice. Note I've declared answer here on line 11, so I don't need to declare it. I just need to use it the next time. All right, so now we're going to run the program again. And over here, it's going to print out the menu, and it's going to allow me to choose 1, 2, or 3. All right, so to be clear, this is the code that's running right now. And specifically, it's sitting on this line waiting for me to type in a number. So I'm going to type in 1, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, so now we went into this loop. It checked to see if 1 was not equal to 3, which it is not equal to 3. So then it went into the loop and it said, if answer is 1, print out hello. And that's why we get that hello over there that I just highlighted. Then it came down past the end of the if statement and it printed back out the menu, which is why you can see the menu again right over here. Maybe I'll just pull up the pen and do that so I can circle things in white. There we go. So you can see that the menu came back up again. This time, when it asked for me to read in another number, that happens here on line 24. And that's what it's currently waiting on. It's waiting for me to type in another number. So I'm going to type in 2, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, and when I hit enter, we're going to go back up to the top of the loop. 2 is not equal to 3. If 2 is equal to 1, it's not, so it does the else if 2 equal to 2, it is, so it printed goodbye. And that's what we see right there, goodbye. And then it went on and it printed the menu again, and it read in another number. And so I can continue hitting 1 and 2 and 3 and or 1 and 2 over and over again, and it'll say hello, goodbye, no problem. When I hit 3, the loop ends. Okay, now let's talk about what's happening with the 3. So this is the line that's reading in the number. So it got a 3. So answer is equal to 3. And the next line is the end of the loop. And you can see that it's highlighting this curly brace because that's the closing curly brace for that one. So it sends me back up to the beginning of the while loop, and the while loop checks that answer is not equal to 3. Well, 3 not equal to 3 is true. So therefore, it believes that the loop has to end because this is false. 3 not equal to 3 is false. I know that's a little bit backwards because you're thinking backwards, but let's talk through that. 3 not equal to 3, false. 3 equal to 3, true. But 3 not equal to 3, false. So that's what caused the loop to end, and then it just moved on to the next line down below. So this is a pretty common thing that you'll see happen in programs as well, which is called giving the user a menu of choices. Obviously, this one's pretty silly. We're just going through and we're giving people a menu of choices, which is hello and goodbye, which isn't very useful, but that's the code that I just typed in pretty much in here. Actually, that has a slightly different version of what I typed, so you've got two different versions of it. So I'm going to do one last example, which is I'm going to have the user get a choice between count up or count down. And in both of those cases, I'm going to then ask them for a starting number. All right, so we're changing the menu. Actually, I should do this in a new replit so that you can still copy this one. I'm going to copy all of this code so that I can use it again in my next replit. But I'm now going to change to another new replit. So replit, new, create. And here we go. All right. Oops. There we go. So what I want to do is I want to prompt the user to give in with a menu to allow them to either say count up or count down. And then depending on which way they choose, I'm then going to ask them for a starting number, and I'm going to have it count up or count down to some number. All right, so here we go. We're going to have basically just going to paste all of that previous code back in again so that I have a starting position. All right, and move this window over so we can see the code. Okay, so now choice 1, count up to 10. Choice 2, count down to 0. Probably capital D there because I put a capital U on the other one. And 3 is going to be quit. Okay, and so I want to do this over and over again. I want to allow the user to keep doing this. So I'm actually just going to put this whole thing inside of a while loop. So up here, I'm going to start a while loop. I don't really know what I'm going to do with that yet. So I'm just going to leave it the parentheses blank, which is not an option. You will eventually have to put something in there, but just temporarily, I'm going to pick this code up and I'm going to move it inside the while loop like that. And then I'm just going to correct the fact that the indentation is a little goofy. Here's a trick. If you need to move multiple lines over, in most IDEs, if you select all of them and then hit Tab, it will move all the lines that were selected over at once. Just makes it easier to do stuff. All right, so far it's going to ask them, do they want to count up or do they want to count down? And then I'm going to ask them, what number do you want to start with? Okay, so I need a semicolon at the end of that line, and then I'm going to read in start number. Okay, so now if they say that they want to count up, then I'm supposed to go from whatever starting number they give up to 10. If they tell me they want to count down, I need to start at whatever number they gave me and go until I get to 0. So this is going to be a little bit complex. And so how do I have two different versions of the same thing? Well, I need an if statement. So if answer, which is the thing that's telling me whether they're going up or down, if the answer is equal to 1, and I'm just going to give myself a comment here, they are counting up. And the other possibility, the answer is equal to 2, and again, I'm just going to give myself a comment, they are counting down. And then finally, if the answer is equal to 3, or let's just do anything else that they type in, then we're going to quit. All right, so how are we going to quit? Well, we need a Boolean in order to deal with this circumstance. So I'm going to make a Boolean, and we'll call it keep going. And we're going to set it equal to true at the beginning. And then while keep going is equal to true. And again, that equal true is actually unnecessary, but I'm just putting it in to make it clear. And then down here, they've typed 3, so keep going is going to be equal to false. All right, so at least we've handled the circumstance where they typed quit. The loop will now end when we do that. We are going to see this menu at least one time, and then we are going to go through and do this if statement. All right, so now how do we do count up? Well, they gave me a starting number, which is this. And what I want to do is I want to print out the starting number and then the next highest number, the next highest number, and the next highest number until I get to 10, because 10 is the number that we're always counting up to. So I'm going to make a variable which I'm going to call count, and I'm going to say int count is equal to the start number. So whatever number they gave me, that's what I'm going to set my count to. And then I'm going to add another while loop here, and I'm going to say while count is less than 10, print the count, and then I'm going to add 1 to the count. All right, and then down over here in answer equal to 2, we're counting down. So this is going to work the same way. I'm going to start off with count equal to the start num. But in this case, I'm saying while count is greater than 0, I'm going to print count. And now this time I'm going to do count minus minus because I need it to get smaller each time through. Okay, so I think that's going to work. Let's give this a try and let's see how it works. Oh, I need to get rid of all this junk down here. Just going to put a final print statement in that just says goodbye, just so that we have something down here at the bottom to see. Okay, so that's just outside of that big while loop that we had up there. All right, so we're going to run this code, and over on the right-hand side, we're going to have a menu, and it's going to ask me, do I want to count up or do I want to count down? So I'm going to say I'm going to count up, and it asks me what number do I want to start with. I'm going to start with 2, and it says, sure, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, now I'm going to say I want to count down. It says, okay, what number do you want to... let's move that over. What number do you want to start with? I'm going to say I'm going to start with 15. Sure, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I'm now going to hit 3 for quit, and that doesn't seem great. What number do you want to start with? I would like to quit from the number 10. It says goodbye. Okay, so that's a bit wonky that it asks for the starting number out here, and we'll talk about how to fix that. But let me talk about the code overall. So I'm just going to move these around a little bit so that it's a bit clearer to see. So what's going on here is I start off, I read in, I create my scanner as always, and I start off with this Boolean, the same kind of idea. This keep going is sort of like a Sentinel value. It's something that is deciding whether we're going to keep going through the loop. And what I want you to notice is I have this outer loop that's producing the menu and asking what it is that they want to do each time. Are they counting up or are they counting down? But then separate from that, when they tell me that they want to count up, I have a whole other loop inside of here that counts up to 10. And another whole loop down here that counts down from 10. And so my point is, there can be more than one loop in your code. As a matter of fact, in this case, there were 3 loops. There's the outer one, there's the count up loop, and there's also the count down loop. I have 3 completely separate loops. And so that's okay. And the other thing that's a little bit goofy here is this loop is actually a parent of that loop, meaning that this loop here that's highlighted is inside the other loop. And you can see that from the way that I indented my code. Anything that's inside something else should always be indented over 2 spaces. So this is starting here, because it's inside of the while loop, so it's over two spaces. And everything in the if statement is over two spaces, and everything in its while is over two spaces. So you can see that this is really far over because it's inside this while, which is inside this if, which is inside this while, which is inside the main method, which is inside the class. So there's a lot of different stuff that can happen inside of each other. So this is a pretty comprehensive example of how you could have multiple different loops that are doing things. I did notice a couple of bugs while I was running it. So it's supposed to count up to 10, but it actually only did 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's because I said while count is less than 10, so it's never going up to 10. So to fix that, I'm just going to add an equals in there, so it's less than or equal to 10. And I had the same problem with counting down. It only actually went to 1, it didn't do 0. So I'm just going to add an equals in here to get down to 0. And then the last problem was this statement happens no matter what. So let's talk through the logic here. It printed out this menu and gave me 3 choices. And the user chose number 3, saying that they wanted to quit. But it went on and it asked them, well, what number do you want to start with right after that? And it shouldn't have done that because realistically, it should only do that if they answer 1 or 2. So I'm just going to copy that code and I'm going to move it into this if statement. Well, that is not what I copied. Let's try that again. I'm going to copy this code and we're going to paste that in here. Okay, and I'm just going to fix the indentation there. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here because I want to ask them in the case where they are counting up or in the case that they're counting down, but I don't want to ask them in the case where they quit. So I'm using that if statement to only ask when I need to ask. And so the keep going one down at the bottom, which was when they chose 3, that's no longer going to ask them what's the starting number. So we're going to run it again. It's going to ask me, do I want to count up or count down? I'm going to say I want to count up. I'm going to start with 5, and it says 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Cool, that works. I'm going to count down, and I'm going to start with 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Cool. And then I'm just going to tell it that I want to quit. So I'm going to hit 3, and the program ends, and it says goodbye. And notice that that goodbye is outside the loop. So therefore, it happens no matter what, whenever I get to the end of the program. So that's another example that I can show you, and that has us going through and figuring out what all of the various different ways that you can use a loop are, a while loop. And so that completes our second lecture on loops. We will have 2 more lectures on loops where we'll look at some other different looping constructs coming up in the next video. So I'll see you guys then.